call the member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, this legislation is an important piece of the patchwork of industrial relations law for the Commonwealth of Australia. It's hard to imagine the scenario that could present itself. A happy family, expectant and excited for the birth of a new child, parents looking to the future, sometimes whether it's the first child or if it's a continuation of their family, only to be struck down by the brutal reality of having a child die shortly after death or a stillborn child. That was the story of Priya's family, who after 42 days lost never to be able to go on and live a full life. And the tragedy of what occurred was that in their suffering and in their grief, while Priya's father was able to secure the leave and continue on paid parental leave to deal with the grief and loss of losing a child, the mother was in a difficult situation where their paid parental leave didn't continue. This is one of the most tragic and heartbreaking stories that you could ever hear as an Australian, because I think we all believe that in these times of deep, dark moments of life, that the only thing we could extend to our fellow citizens is a sense of compassion and empathy for the tragedy that has been lived. And of course, their story is not alone in living with the reality of a stillborn child or having a child that has sadly passed away shortly after death. And that in that situation, every person who has lived with that reality deserves the most incredible warmth, generosity and empathy from those in their care and support network and their employment to make sure that they are able to manage and deal with their grief. So this bill is about respecting the fact that nobody should be forced back to work while they're dealing with the urgency of that grief. This bill is about recognising that as terrible as the situation that befell the family of baby Priya, the legacy of her life and her love will live on by making sure that nobody else need live it again. And so the Fair Work Amendment, Baby Priya's Bill 2025, is a bipartisan effort on this House to make sure that it isn't lived again. It was an issue that arose during the last federal election, and the Coalition gave a bipartisan commitment that we would honour, regardless of who won government, to deliver this change in law. And in doing so, in supporting this bill today, we are delivering on that promise. It's important in recognising that the importance of the humanity and the compassion that must ultimately underpin our employment laws, particularly at a time of maximum vulnerability for so many Australians. Because while we might sometimes in this place talk about dollars and cents and wages and industrial frameworks, abstract rules, the place of unions, organisation, superannuation has just happened then, sitting behind all of those conversations are people, dignity, lives and families. But just as we face the challenges of what happens when we have workplace deaths and the fact that lives will change forever, it is nothing in comparison, of course, to the tragedy of what would happen when a family loses a child in such a way. So this bill seeks to address that and to address in terms of industrial relations instruments to make sure that families have a pathway forward. This bill amends the Fair Work Act to introduce a new principle that unless employers and employees have expressly agreed otherwise, that employer-funded paid parental leave must not be cancelled because a child is stillborn or dies. The bill aligns with the Fair Work Act with the government paid parental leave scheme. It's about ensuring compassion, it's about ensuring dignity, And more important, it's about honouring and respecting the need to manage grief and to honour the lives that are lost, and for families to be able to support each other through these difficult times. Because when families endure the unimaginable scenario of losing a child, the law should never compound cruelty or to the tragedy or add to the fate. It should not be a debate that leads to a dispute about when leave begins or ends. It should be about respect and treating Australians with respect and kindness in the workplace in these moments of grief. And it's with this reform we're putting a place in a guarantee that in those darkest of times, in those darkest of moments, ones of which we hope none of us will ever have to live through, that the system is going to stand by mothers and fathers and support them to be able to live out and to support each other. But this bill is also about honouring Priya's memory and her legacy of love. That what her family endured is something that no family should ever have to endure again. By ensuring these protections, we're turning this heartbreak into a legacy of love. And it will be a gift to other families who tragically experience the same circumstances, and ensure that it is not befallen on other members of the Australian community. By passing this legislation, we're sending very clearly a message to the Australian society that we're not going to look away in moments of grief, that this parliament is there to back people, to back families, to support them, and we acknowledge and support and stand by them at their most vulnerable moments. In this moment, we also want to extend our incredible gratitude to Priya's family for being prepared to come forward. I can't imagine, Deputy Speaker, the scale of the challenge that was faced by Priya's family, but then the courage to be able to stand up and bring attention to their plight and their situation that has led to this legislative change. I genuinely can't. That out of grief and tragedy they have seen the responsibility that they could give such love and gift to others. It's at this time that I want to express our gratitude from the Coalition, because in the midst of this unbearable loss, you have found that courage to lead. That bravery has reminded everyone in this parliament and the country of the importance of decency, of kindness and humanity, and of course of this legislative change, which will be the ongoing legacy. It's easy for politicians to talk about these sorts of important values, but it's much harder for families to live through them in these difficult times. And you've done that, and Australia will be better for it, but you're not alone, because there are other families who have had to endure these challenges as well. And I want to particularly recognise those who have walked beside Priya's family to get to this moment, in particular Bears of Hope, an organisation that helps families who experience the loss of their baby who have been part of advocacy for this bill. Because this bill is not just about the case of Priya's family, though it may have been the catalyst for change. It's about setting a standard for all of us, but also honouring those stories and those families whose stories didn't make it all the way into this chamber and may not have got the attention they so justly deserved. And when we reached out to Bears of Hope and asked them about some of those stories, people were so generous in coming forward because they understood how important this moment was for honouring not just their experience, but of course the legacy of their loved ones. And Deputy Speaker, I've de-identified some details just to ensure to respect the honour of the legacies of those past, but I don't want in any way for those families to be misinterpreted that I'm seeking to dishonour the memory of their lost child. One story. In 2021, I had started a new job in the private sector, And not long after, my wife and I found out we were excitedly expecting our second child. Being a new employee, I had no leave or sick leave accrued. I mention this because in June 2021 we received the news that our baby boy had a terminal diagnosis and he would not survive the pregnancy. Initially, the workplace was supportive, whilst I used that minimal leave I had to attend appointments with specialists. Place also like funeral parlour to discuss cremation versus burial and then return straight back to work. When discussing the inevitable with my manager and letting her know that it was my intention to use the 2 weeks half-pay parental leave, yes, 2 weeks half-pay, that's all dads get, this was her reply. 2 weeks half-pay. Why are you going to take 2 weeks? Do you even need 2 weeks? I mean, it's not like you're going to have a baby at home to look after. Luke was born sleeping on the 19th of July 2021, and I was requested back to work on the 30th of July 2021. Second story. I'm unfortunately a bereaved parent who also experienced the unconscionable lack of empathy and support from my employer at the time, who I provided my dedicated service for many years. My twin pregnancy was extremely high risk with complications which my employer was aware of. I ended up giving birth at 23 weeks and 5 days pregnant. I notified my employer, and then my twins tragically died in the ICU at 4 days old on 16 April 2021. Mere weeks after my twin daughters' funerals, I was contacted by my employer at the time asking about my return to work. This was, of course, met with confusion and shock for me, given I had pre-approved paid maternity leave, which was to commence upon the birth of my daughters. They referred to their employee handbook stating that the paid maternity leave is only for parents who are the primary caregiver of a child, and given my regrettable circumstances, I was no longer eligible for the company-funded parental leave. I was in complete shock that in such a dark, tragic time of my life, I was then treated with such a lack of empathy and disregard for my circumstances. I couldn't believe that I remained eligible for parental leave payments from Centrelink, who was acknowledging that I'm still a parent who gave birth and still required time off work to recover and heal regardless of whether my children were alive or not. Yet my employer, whom I'd been loyal to for many years, could make such a heartless decision, making an extremely dark time for myself and my family even worse. I was then faced with negotiating a return to work plan with my employer instead of having those sacred days and weeks to heal and grieve my children and face my new reality. I had no choice but to take unpaid maternity leave from my employer, who wasn't very willing to accept it. It was so unfair and made an already tragic and heartbreaking time in my life even worse. I'm writing this to help in any way that I can, as I don't want any bereaved parents to face the same heartless circumstances so many of us already have due to an inhumane lack of empathy from employers. Another story. This past August, I gave birth to a stillborn baby at 39 weeks and 4 days. Before our baby's arrival, my husband and I had arranged our parental leave with our respective workplaces. I was set to take a combination of unpaid maternity leave and government parental leave for 12 months. My husband had arranged 2 weeks of paid paternity leave from work and 2 weeks of paid parental leave through the government. I want to share what happened after our baby's passing. I gave birth on a Sunday. The following day, my husband called his workplace to inform them of our loss. He was told he would be only entitled to 2 days of bereavement leave. This was devastating for me to hear at the time. I felt that I would be left to grieve alone without my husband by my side. My husband, on the other hand, was also in shock and trying to process the sudden loss of our child, and he was not in a fit state to return to work. After a period of uncertainty, we were told that his manager had to escalate the situation to HR to seek approval for him to retain his paid paternity leave. While the leave was eventually approved, his workplace also questioned whether he still needed 4 weeks off. At the time, this felt deeply invalidating. It made me feel like our baby's death didn't matter or was an inconvenience for the company. The stress and uncertainty during this time were immense. Being given space to grieve is not a luxury. It's essential. Parents need time to support each other through the trauma of losing a child. It is heartbreaking to know that others in our situation are expected to return to work so soon before they have had a chance to begin healing. The 4 weeks we had planned to spend bonding with our baby were instead spent navigating grief, engaging with support services, seeking counselling, waiting for our baby to be returned from autopsy so we could spend a few final hours together arranging a funeral and trying to find a way forward. Parents should be given adequate time to come to terms with their loss. Honouring paid parental leave entitlements is the least that can be done. Offering just 2 or 3 days of bereavement leave is simply not enough. We spent 2 to 3 days in hospital holding and cherishing the very short time we had with our precious baby. This time was priceless for us. I fully support baby Priya's bill and know it will make a difference to parents who leave the hospital with empty arms and broken hearts. I work as a registered nurse, and I had my stillborn daughter at 33 weeks and was supposed to go on maternity leave at 36 weeks. My CEO cancelled my maternity leave and allowed me to have 2 weeks of compassionate leave from my own sick leave, might I add. I understand that in our employee agreement that there was a clause in there that I had a fetus born at 12-week gestation and for it to live they would have allowed maternity leave. This is absolutely ridiculous. I was now in the pits of my grief and severe stress, as I have a mortgage to pay and need to pay for this. I felt that I was in a corner with nowhere else to go, but to go back to work life, nothing has happened. While still bleeding and recovering from birthing my dead child. Being a nurse and in the health industry, I felt that I should have been more supported, but unfortunately was not. Even more kick in the teeth was that I found out a few years before my time that a higher-up manager also had a stillborn and they paid her maternity leave. No parent should go through losing a child. I would not wish this on my worst enemy. Workplaces should honour their maternity leave regardless of the circumstances of their loss. Deputy Speaker, reading these stories is heartbreaking. Reading these stories into the nation's record is actually one of the hardest things I have done in this role, but is nothing in comparison to what those who have lived them. We can't take back the past, the decisions that people have made, the absence of empathy that people have lived. But we do have choices. We have choices about the type of country we want to be, the type of laws we want to live out, and the changes that we can make so that people don't have to live these situations again. There are, of course, lots of conflicting issues that can arise. But when it comes down to it, no matter who the employer is, I have no doubt in the overwhelming majority of businesses, employers across this nation, in the situation where people have a stillborn child or a child who dies shortly after death during a period of paid parental leave, that their first course of action is the most incredible wave of empathy and support for the parents who have lived the most incredible tragedy. Sadly, unfortunately, there will always be a few outliers. But I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that the overwhelming majority of Australians do the right thing to support those families, to work with them, and to give the assistance that's required. And there will be some people, stoically, who will want to find a pathway back to employment as part of their managing their own grief. How they do that, I don't quite understand, but that's not a matter for me. That's something for them and their employer, and the bill provides a pathway for people to do that based on their own unique circumstances. But it's so important that we set a standard about the tragedy that occurs and the pathway for the law to recognise the tragedy that exists, the grief that is lived, and how the law must change to respect and reflect that, to support those in that incredible stage of time. And so that is what we're seeking to achieve in this amendment. It ensures that when Australians face grief, their workplaces and their laws reflect the best of our national character as Australians: fairness, respect, compassion. It also reminds us as legislators that the true meaning of society is how we treat people in their moments of vulnerability, including honouring loss. Because that is not just what this bill does, but of course it empowers those who have gone through the most unimaginable tragedy. And by passing this bill, we're sending a clear message in Australia that no family grieves alone, and no parent should face the indignity of loss, and certainly not alone, as Priya's family faced. I'm respectfully, incredibly proud to support this bill with the support of the Coalition. It honours Priya's memory and her family's courage, and to all families who have experienced such devastation. And I hope this reform stands as a reminder to all of us in this place that beyond the politics that sometimes leaves this place feisty, our duty is to bring decency, kindness and humanity into the laws of our nation. And that this is a legacy of reform, and this is a legacy to baby Priya and to the love to her from her family that will bring this parliament together. And I call on all others in this parliament to support this bill, to be part of making sure that no other family ever has to endure what Priya's family and the other families that I have read out and those who have not been recorded into the Hansard have lived, or accept that we are choosing to knowingly allow the status quo to continue for those families in loss and grief. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank the member.